Good day, viewers. Today, I welcome two changemakers, Miss Evelyn Cosme. Evelyn is a leadership consultant, and what Evelyn does is amazing. Evelyn is a speaker, and she's an interventionist. She's a psychologist. She's a leadership expert. She's an education expert. Believe it or not, this lady has training in all of these areas. And she also has hands-on experience of decades helping managers, leaders, individuals in all of these areas to deal with trauma, to identify ways that they can bring change into their institutions and into their lives, and to help them to ease into growth and improvement. Welcome, Evelyn. Could you introduce yourself to us a little? Because I'm sure that in your huge bio, I've left out some things.
Thank you so much. That was quite a bit anyway. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Marcia, for inviting me to begin with. And I want to congratulate you for your book. It's been published. I'm so happy for you. It's a beautiful story, and I've enjoyed speaking to you so much about it on my own podcast. So I appreciate you. And please tell people about your book. I think it's a great moment for that.
Thanks, Evelyn. I feel like energy is just coming out of me and embracing everybody because I feel so happy about having launched that book. The book is called Lighting the Path, Leaning into a Hopeful Future as a Special Needs Parent. I've been a special needs parent for about 8 years now. My daughter became brain injured and bedridden back in 2012. She turned 9 in March. And life used to feel really heavy, but over time, and you are the expert in emotional trauma, over time I've learned how to hold my emotions in my hand, how to really engage with my emotions and face my emotions, face the darkness, because unless I face the darkness, I would not be able to move past. I would not be able to heal and find more light. And once I started making that shift, I found myself wanting to share what I had learned, what my family had learned, with others who I saw living in the same despair I used to live in. That's what Lighting the Path does. It's intended to help other special needs parents build up their resilience and see that there's hope and joy to be had, even in the most adverse circumstances of life. The other purpose for the book is to give information about the special needs life to everybody, because inclusiveness is so important. Special needs people feel so isolated, and that's something that I really, really want to change. So thanks for asking. I'm so happy to share that book with everybody. And I'll put in the show notes the link to the book, because you actually can click on, look inside, and get free 2 chapters to read.
That's awesome. Yes, I got mine. Thank you. And I will be reading it and hope to talk to you more about your book once I've read it. Thank you so much.
I'm looking forward to your feedback.
It's a beautiful story, and it's so inspirational, and it gives so much hope. And I appreciate that so much about you, and the vulnerability of just putting all of that into words for others to be able to share it. Thank you.
Thank you. So is there anything that you really feel you want to highlight about your journey to becoming the professional that you've become? What about your background led you into doing what you are doing?
I didn't I didn't put two and two together until later on in life, and maybe that'll come up in the conversation today. But I remember when I was about 15 years old, and we're going really way back here, but when I was 15 years old, I sat down to watch a show on television, and the family, nobody was interested, but I thought it was like a fascinating title. So I sat down to watch it, and I cried through it like a baby. Uh, and and just to be really brief about the storyline, the main character was like a conduit for emotions of the people around him. And he experienced their suffering, their sense of guilt, of shame, etc. And I cried through that. And I don't remember at that age having lived anything like that myself, but it moved me so much. And I thought to myself at that time, nobody should really ever suffer that way. No one should feel a sense of shame or guilt or unworthiness, or that they're not enough. And I want to do something about that. So that kind of like marked, my path right there. And psychology seemed to be the best route for it when I started researching careers and what I was drawn to. At school, I was the one that always broke up fights and told people, "Oh, your friends, don't fight, don't do this, don't do that. Um, let's just work together and overcome." So people would always be coming to me, even very young, for counseling. What do you think about this? What do you think I should do about that? And I was called by my peers Granny because of I guess the way they felt when they were around me. There was that comfort, and so it kind of like came out very naturally to want to help people to become a great listener, because sometimes people, what they need is to be heard. And so later on in college, I was studying my master's actually in psychology, and we had just covered the topic of trauma. And I was heading out for a meal with one of my friends from school, and I'm driving, and at a red light, I was crying. I started crying, and she asked me, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "I just realized," and everything came back. A childhood trauma when I was 5 years old. I had tucked that deep down inside somewhere. And not until I was studying psychology, it came out. And then I realized, after the years and working with my own trauma, that I had hit it so deeply that even if there were things that triggered it, I didn't make the connection. I wasn't thinking about that moment. I wasn't thinking about how it made me feel, or how it changed the way I lived, my relationships, my decisions, everything, when I was able to trace it back to that moment in time. And so it was there. And then,
Right.
so these are things that happen to people constantly. We all go through trauma at some point in our lives, at a greater or lesser degree. And one thing I really want to share is, a lot of people think that if it doesn't happen to them, they don't experience trauma. But the reality is that anyone who witnesses trauma is also affected by it. And depending on the relationship with the person who's actually experiencing the trauma, then it's closer to home and it's more painful. For instance, with children, and in my own case, seeing something that was quite traumatic, and we won't go into the details now, but for children, we know from research that a child who witnesses any kind of abuse or violence or any traumatic event, they feel it very personally, as if it happened to them. And it starts accumulating in their memories, which they can shove down deep down inside, like I did, apparently. And or they're triggered by different things in the environment. It could be an aroma that when that trauma happened, there was something cooking in the pot in the kitchen. It could be a sound. It can be a song, music. It could be wind. It could be anything at all that at a given moment triggers those memories. And the memories can be memories that you think that rise, but it can also be cellular memory, and which means that you feel almost the same way you were feeling that day you experienced that trauma. And wherever it happened, if you got hit, for example, if you got slapped, whatever it was, it'll come up in that part of the body, or you will experience through life maybe discomfort in those parts of your body as well. So trauma is a serious thing. It's no joke. And it's something that really needs to be addressed for sure.
That sparks something for me. I remember as a child, you would be exposed to a quarrel between other people, but you would know that this quarrel would then spiral, and somebody in that situation would have been so angry after that it would have led to you being abused after, something like that.
Because and that's really interesting. I'm sorry, did you finish?
That's okay. And so as an adult, I've had so many times where in my mind I replay this, not the scene, I don't see it, I hear it. I hear the argument. I hear the emotion of the argument, the sound of the argument, not the words. And immediately it feels like I'm under stress because something bad is about to happen. Nothing bad is happening in my life, but I'm connected to something that I would have witnessed when I was a really little child.
Exactly.
That's it. So is it that you are saying that trauma, whether we have faced it or not, might end up being like a ball and chain situation? It holds us back, it pins us in some ways.
Absolutely. And it will do different things. Trauma is basically like this inability to inhabit your own body without being possessed by the defense mechanisms in your body, because your body's trying to save you, is trying to protect you all of the time. So it will either help you to become numb, it will make you forget, or when things are triggered, your response system is going to tell you that is similar, even if it's not an actual traumatic experience. But like I said, sound, smells, sensations can trigger those things and those memories, whether it's cellular or that you're actually reliving those experiences with your mind. Now, and I'm trying to be as simple as possible because I want everyone to understand this. One thing that you mentioned very important is that it affects everyone, and we're going through this right now, as a matter of fact, with the collective trauma. We see so much going on in the world, and even if we haven't experienced a natural disaster, even if we haven't been nearby a volcano erupting or a hurricane like Maria that occurred some time ago, and in all parts of the world, fires, war, gang violence, etc., you are still part of that because we're really all one. We're all so connected spiritually, energetically, and that's something that comes into play with trauma. And that's why in a family unit, if a family has experienced domestic abuse for generations, it keeps repeating itself until somebody stops that cycle by getting help, by learning about it, by trying to break the cycle in learning strategies on how to deal with it, which is what a lot of what I do and help people with. Now, think of it of it's like a psychic wound, okay? And it hardens you psychologically. It interferes with your ability to grow, to develop even. And this has been studied closely, especially now with technology, which is wonderful. We're able to assess the process that the brain goes through, the body, the sensations.
Right.
So we're able to connect these things and the reality of the connection
It's interesting
that
to
it
me.
all has. Yes.
It's interesting to me when you say trauma hardens you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing that hardening takes different forms. It could be
Of course,
numbness,
absolutely.
the roughness that I come across as rough and unapproachable because I protect myself by putting up an outer shell,
Absolutely.
like the inner softness. What do you think some of the ways that this hardness could manifest as?
Well, remember that you start operating from a place of pain, and you start operating from a place of fear, and it's like an emotional scarring, and that makes you either less flexible, more rigid, maybe less feeling, more defensive. So for everyone, it can be different, and it could be a combination of behaviors. And some of the symptoms, and I want everybody in the audience today to kind of like start checking yourself. And people around you. And I don't want you to say, oh, you're going through this, you're being aggressive, you probably have a trauma. Please don't go to the extremes. The purpose of this conversation is that you learn about this topic and start figuring out if you might need help or not, or someone that you love and care about does, and to start breaking that cycle in your own life. Now, when we have experienced trauma, there are some signs to look out for, and it can vary, like we said, from adult to adolescence and in children, for instance. We can react aggressively, we can regress like into primal responses, we can, roll up into a little ball, or we can wet our bed if we're a child. These are the responses, especially for children, if they don't have the vocabulary to express their feelings. And it depends on how safe they feel to express themselves and what is going on, which is the case usually for domestic abuse or child abuse at that. Now, you respond with fear, of course, or you become paralyzed, and then it keeps translating into how you live your life. So you can have, for instance,
so I might hole up in my room and sleep all the time.
Absolutely. These are signs. You can have increased heart rate when you're triggered, for instance, rapid or difficult breathing. These are things that when your body's changing, pay attention to it. Pay attention. If something's happening around you and you can't pinpoint what it is, try and think about it. And maybe your brain has allowed you to forget to protect you so that you could go on living, and you don't have clear memories. In my case, I really didn't think about that incident. I remember it happened and it was horrible, but all those years, even when I saw that movie and I cried so much and I said, I want to help people, I didn't connect it to what I had experienced as a child. So,
Hmm.
so some more really important things to look out for when you are in denial about certain situations and perspectives that you might have about yourself or your life. Feelings of helplessness, immobility,
Yeah.
freezing up before different types of scenarios in your life. The hypervigilance. I was always
Ball's
alert.
going to drop now. Let me keep paying attention so that I
Yes,
can.
yes. And I remember now looking back then, after that 5-year-old little girl experienced that traumatic situation, I remember I would stay up at night waiting. And if I heard anything, I felt I needed to be there to save, to protect the people that I love because of what was going on. And I would go to school the next day tired and sleepy, and the teachers would they'd say, "What's up? You're not paying attention." But I was sworn to secrecy, and that's the other thing. I was sworn to secrecy, not to tell what had happened, not to say
Mhm.
anything to anyone. So I didn't reach out to anyone at the school level, in the community. My friends didn't know. No one knew what had happened except that classmate from my master's program who I was driving out to go to dinner with, that I broke down because it all came back to me, all the details, everything. I felt in the car driving that day like that 5-year-old little girl reliving that whole experience.
Yeah.
And so we can have intrusive imagery, for instance, or the flashbacks as they call them as well. And people might have flashbacks, maybe not complete a storyline of the flashback. It might be bits and pieces that ultimately they start putting together if they're doing the inner work.
Mm.
And that's the most important thing. And it's a painful thing. Let me tell you, I went through it. I've had to do it to improve the quality of my own life and of my relationships, um, particularly with partners, when I was married and whatnot. That was so important for me to do that, and for my own son, that nothing gets repeated in our lives and his life. Although he's a grown man now, I'm very proud to say he serves in the military, and so I don't have any concerns that there will be any repetitions of
That's
that
great.
in that generation.
So,
He's
Evelyn,
clear. Mhm.
a lot of your work, a big part of your work happens with you working with leaders.
Yes,
Leaders in institutions, of educational institutions, professional institutions, and also leaders in the community, because you actually have a community leadership award as well.
yes, I do,
So
actually.
when you look at the times that we are in, I know we can't go into too much detail because it is a limited time,
Of
but
course.
I can't help myself but ask this. How have you seen um, the trauma or the needs of leaders shifting as we come into this period?
Yes. Like I mentioned before, we are experiencing constantly now, more than ever, um, collective trauma. And this time it's worldwide, sadly. But there's light at the end of the tunnel. And anyone in positions of leadership, and I really want to stress this, everyone who is caring for someone, watching over someone, parents, faith-based leaders, anyone in leadership. So please, parents, or if you're caring for an elderly parent, whatever the case may be, you are a leader. Don't doubt that. What you might need is to develop leadership skills in order to improve your own life and that of those around you. And the same applies to leaders in organizations. We don't expect leaders to do therapy and go into coaching, etc. Although a good leader does coach in terms of development for their staff. But when it comes to leadership, leaders now have to be aware of the impact of trauma in their employees. If they don't, they're going to lose this situation to so much absenteeism, the performance levels decrease significantly, and it impacts the bottom line, which is the revenue for a company. So it's really important for leaders to be knowledgeable about trauma, but it starts with themselves. And this is a lot of the work that I do. You can get information about trauma, obviously, and you can get help, and you can go to a therapist, which is a wonderful way to work through this. In my case, because of the background that I have, that I've been in leadership for 30 years, I've been a therapist as well, and an educator. I bring all of this together, and I'm able to understand that leader that goes into the boardroom, that's putting out a fire, that's doing damage control, that's dealing with the dynamics of maybe possibly a toxic organizational cultural environment, and having
And
their
trying to
own
mentor
traumas,
people as well, right?
and dealing with their own traumas and triggers. Who helps them? And like I said, they can go and get help. But if they have someone that understands their lifestyle as a leader and the importance of keeping face, although now we talk more about showing a little vulnerability and compassion in the workplace, and that's a thing that I've been talking about for many years. Not just now, it's very trendy now, the compassionate leadership style, but how a leader can improve his whole organization or her organization if they work with their own trauma, if they work with crisis, if they work with the life transitions that are impacting their lives. And I want to take advantage and talk now about trauma in terms of the different types of trauma. We won't get too scientific about it. Very briefly, there's three basic types of trauma, and one is shock trauma, and that's the one they call PTSD, which is post-traumatic syndrome disorder. And that results from feelings of overwhelm by just one event. And that event usually has a beginning and it has an end, okay? And so, and I'm sharing this because I want you to start thinking in the audience. I don't want to trigger anyone, and possibly you will, but just so that you can start thinking about these things, of everything that's going on right now. And the other thing is, it abruptly interrupts the flow of your life, which is what's happened recently in the last year or so. You know, everything that has happened, and I don't want to mention specifically any events. You feel frozen in the event. And this is what we're having right now in the workplace. People are staying home, frozen, not wanting to go back to their jobs. Businesses don't have enough employees to run their businesses. And that, of course, affects the provision of services, maybe the production of products, transporting these products to and from places that need them, and so on and so forth. So there's a chain reaction with being frozen, and people freeze in different ways. You could still be at work and not feel up to it to perform the best you can, because we're living in very uncertain times and people are fearful. So you can feel, for instance, I'm thinking of the right, shattered, for instance, like you're shattered into pieces, and you're trying to grab and find those pieces again, because you don't feel safe, you don't feel secure, you don't know if you're going to have a job in the next few months because of all the dynamics that are occurring in the workplace. And on top of that, you might have added toxicity with people not really feeling at their best, you know. And now with the shock trauma, this includes, and I want to say this because it includes a lot what has happened with you, Marcia. It includes falls, accidents, assaults, suffocation, acts of war, of course. And with acts of war, we need to add on that there can be a multiplicity of trauma experiences, not just the war itself and being in that environment, losing loved ones, becoming ill, and not having access to health care, the predators that come around families, broken families during times of war. Pedophiles have a field day at war and different disasters around the nation. They flock to help, but they're really predators out there to try and take advantage of little children or other people that are in need. So we have to be aware of these things. Near drowning experiences, invasive medical procedures, a result of a medical procedure that ended up in such a traumatic event, and you can speak to that very well and how that has impacted your family. And luckily, you and your husband and your son, Brian, have found a wonderful thing to bring you together in love and care for Emma and provide what she needs and overcoming this traumatic event as well.
Thank you. So that's number one, that's shock trauma, but you said there were three.
Yes, and then the second one, to be as brief as possible. I do want to say with shock trauma, though, when children, particularly children, experience at least 3-4 different types of trauma under one event, it can delay their physical maturity and their behavior as well, and other aspects of their development, which is very important. And then the second one, the child's nervous system can also be affected. Now, with the third trauma, and it's the one I want to get to because it's so important, and you can figure out the second trauma. It could be other things, separation, losing a job, etc., and everything that can include. But the third one is intergenerational trauma. And that's what we're talking about, families. And that's why now there's such a huge trend, even in not just in psychology, but in the spiritual circles of people understanding the importance of this. Way back, I mean, for centuries, indigenous people understand this connection of ancestral trauma and how it can be carried on. So now we're getting really serious about this, and it's so important to address it in order for families to be able to thrive and to break those chains and those cycles, like I mentioned. So basically, everyone does experience some sort of trauma, like I mentioned.
So, gosh, Evelyn, I'm tempted to go dig into that intergenerational trauma because that's a huge field. You start to talk about energy, you start to talk about spirituality, you start to talk about genetics, passing it on through your cells and through your genes. But let's not open that
not at all.
It's a box that needs, I think we need a separate interview, maybe just to treat with that.
Absolutely.
So I do want to spend a little time giving some tips. If you had to give 3 tips from your whole box, from your whole toolkit, what would the 3 tips be that you could share with our listeners for how they could find more ease in this time, whether it is to deal with trauma that's coming up, whether it is to identify things that are keeping them stuck or keeping them hardening up and putting up that shell? What are your top 3 things that can help us, especially in this time, to live a fuller, more joyful and fulfilled life?
First and foremost is getting to know yourself, getting to know thyself. It's been written in books from ancient times, and it still holds true today and will continue to be so. You have to get to know yourself, and there's different ways to go about that. You can reach out to a therapist who's trained in that aspect, although most therapists are, but some are more specialized than others because of the work that they've done. Doing things to embody your spirit. And what I mean is that you actually become aware of your spirit, because we're in the head all the time. Leaders and everyone, parents, rushing to get things done. We're always in our head, the list of things we need to do. We have to feel our bodies and not be afraid of what comes up. And how we can do that with exercising, with dancing, movement. There's lots of therapies that include movement and wonderful therapies that include creativity as well, where you can start connecting with yourself through art, music. I know that you in particular, you write beautiful poetry, you create these beautiful bookmarks as well. So you're channeling a lot of energy that could be stagnant and causing a lot of problems for your health, emotional state, and for your performance on a daily basis. So that helps to release a lot. Meditation, prayer, whatever works for you to calm you down and to connect with yourself is the most important thing for sure. And reaching out and getting help, like I said, a therapist, it could be a coach, it could be someone, and you can start small. You can start locally with, if you're with a faith-based organization, perhaps your pastor, priest, minister, many of them are trained to deal with that sort of thing, and you can reach out to them, someone in the community, a leader in the community that can steer you to someone who would be able to help you. But one thing I want to say, when you start connecting with yourself, you start understanding yourself. You start seeing and perceiving others differently. And it brings on a different level of feeling towards people. And it includes compassion. It includes a level of benevolence. It includes you perceiving people from a perspective of that's non-judgmental, because you start being able to put yourself in those shoes and not to walk their walk, but or not, and not even to excuse their behaviors if they're very extreme, but to try to understand and to be aware that everybody has experienced trauma to some extent. Some people, like I said, may lead very wonderful lives, and they've used different mechanisms to deal with it and cope with it, and they get through life just fine until something happens and they need to address this. Don't wait for that. And most important thing, please break that cycle in your own family, in your own life, somehow, some way. And I think that's it.
That's big. I mean, you gave me 3, but inside of those 3 were other tips. That non-judgment thing is a big one. And it starts with us learning not to judge ourselves so harshly. So one thing that I'd like to end on is that I'm aware that you have so many services that you offer to people, paid as well as complimentary. What could somebody come to you to start building a relationship with you, to start getting a little bit of your service? I know you have different services that you offer right now, so I invite you to share one that's going to change people's lives right now.
Well, right now, like I mentioned, the most important thing is to get to know yourself, and learning about emotions is key, and your own emotions and addressing them. So I packaged a gift, a very special gift from my heart to yours, so that you can start that journey. And what it is, it's a short video, about 10 minutes long. It's an introduction to the journey to your emotions. And what you do is that you listen to that video and there's an assignment at the end of it, but I've added to that prompts that I'll be sending you for about 15 days, possibly more. And you'll be getting different prompts, either for you to journal about. And when you journal, remember, you don't have to write. You can type it into your phone. You can create a song, a poem about it. Whatever way you'd like to address it is fine. The important thing is to express it. And you might have a journaling prompt, a specific journaling prompt. You might receive a video about a topic that supports that first video, and some additional content of high value for that purpose. So you'll be able to find that on my business page, Facebook business page, and the address is here on my banner behind me here, and you can see that, facebook.com/women ready to lead. Now, I want to say that although I serve women, I serve very special men too, and I work with men as well, usually referred to me by their wives, actually, or co-workers, etc. And so I've been very happy, and I have great testimonials from men as well for the work that I do. And because I've worked with organizations, they've been impacted by learning about these things as well. Now, I just want to add two things. There's two questions you can ask yourself, and I know we're going to end soon. You're going to ask yourself, does the problem cause you distress? If you're having a situation, that's one question I want you to ask yourself. Does the problem cause distress? Do you spend time during the week thinking about an incident? Are you embarrassed by it? The quality of your life, is it impacted? Is it a low quality of life because of it? Are you avoiding situations or places, things because of that situation? That means you might need to start working on these issues. The next question is it interfering with any part of your life? And be very specific, identifying that with your relationships, with your work, with your health, your wellness, emotional wellness. And do you have to switch up things that you do because of this problem? If you do, like in my case, I remember very briefly, there were things I would avoid doing, even relating with men that looked like the person that caused that traumatic event in my life. I would steer clear from them, even though they hadn't done anything to me specifically, you know. So if you're doing things like that, avoiding people, places, and things, please consider getting help or starting to read and look for information to start that path, that journey to your emotions and to improving the quality of your life.
Thank you, Evelyn. So listeners, what I will do is Evelyn is going to tell us exactly how we can sign up to receive that wonderful free gift and the follow-on series of prompts in our email. She'll give me the link. I believe the link is right behind her on her desktop. It's facebook.com/woman ready to lead. And I'm going to put that in the description under the video. Some people call it the show notes.
Yes.
I'm also going to put Evelyn's website in there. You can go straight to the website and you'll be able to sign up there as well. So be sure to check those two resources. Evelyn's offers are amazingly supportive. They are going to change your life. These are small tools and tips that are easy to implement, but they have big positive impact on your life. I know this for a fact because I'm Evelyn's friend. I've become Evelyn's friend, and every tip she gives me has helped me to say, yes, I think I'm better off for having done this. Evelyn, thank you so much for joining us for this Changemaker interview. And please continue changing the world around you by being fully you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me here on the show. And I hope that you haven't been triggered, anyone in the audience. And if you have been, take a deep breath and do something nice for yourself. Eat something yummy and start working on these things. Remember that trauma is an invisible force and you have the power to take control of your life and of your emotions, and always give yourself so much self-love and so much compassion and benevolence. Start with yourself and then the rest. Take care. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thank you, Marsha. It was great. Thank you. I appreciate it.